I'm Dennis Anderson along with Julie Zenner, and here's what's coming up on Almanac North.
The rise in opioid addiction is receiving extra attention in the region thanks to a large grant funneled through St. Louis County that will provide more treatment capacity.
On the heels of Hurricane Harvey, a massive storm is nearing South Florida. Red Cross officials are here tonight to talk about the Northland response to disaster.
And we'll have another veterans profile in our continuing series, Voices of Vietnam.
These stories and more coming up right now on Almanac North. Hello again and welcome to Almanac North. Thank you very much for watching. And Julie, a lot of people with family or friends in Florida are probably on pins and needles right about now.
It's a very dangerous, very scary situation that a lot of people are watching very carefully.
The storm is going to go right up the spine of the state of Florida, so it's going to be rough.
It looks like it could be terrible.
Yeah, we'll have a lot more on that a little later in the show, but first let's get to our first guests.
All right. Thank you, Denny, and welcome everyone. A large grant from the state of Minnesota announced this week will go to ramp up resources for the treatment of people fighting opioid addiction. The money was awarded to St. Louis County and its partner agencies that have been working on drug addiction issues for years. The county also okayed additional funds to combat this rapidly growing problem. And here to explain are some of the partners. Gary Olson is the executive director of the Center for Alcohol and Drug Treatment. Laura Palombi is with the UMD College of Pharmacy, which will be getting some of the funding. And Greg Anderson is with St. Louis County Social Services and focuses on chemical dependency issues. And thanks to all of you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Exciting news related to a very critical problem that's been developing in our area. Greg, maybe you can start by telling us a little bit about how this whole funding package came together, because it really does put some great resources into our region.
Well, actually, the process started late in 2016, thanks to the hard work of Senator Culbert. Through her work and support, the U.S. government was able to pass, I believe, what was entitled the 21st Century's Cure Act, which I think allocated close to $2 billion in relationship to helping rural areas throughout the United States address the ongoing crisis in relationship to opioid addiction. And then through that, the state of Minnesota was able to access $5.4 million per year for the next 2 years to basically allocate monies to local agencies and entities to address the crisis in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
So Laura, how is opioid addiction different in withdrawal from, say, other drugs that people might be using?
Opioid withdrawal is a very tough withdrawal. It keeps a lot of people on opioids because they fear that very severe withdrawal. And so it is something where appropriate treatment is very much appropriate and needed in our area.
Do those who are withdrawing, they feel sick, physically ill?
Very sick, very, very sick. It's one of the worst withdrawals.
Mm-hmm. How big an issue is opioid addiction in our region?
It's difficult to quantify it in terms of the number of people impacted, but to give you some idea, we currently have at the Center for Alcohol and Drug Treatment, we have 500 patients in some phase of medication-assisted treatment. We've seen an additional 300 that came to get help but didn't stay. And then we have many thousands of people on long-term opioid therapy for chronic pain, some of whom are having addiction symptoms. So it's a pretty massive problem.
Mm-hmm. And what are the substances typically that people in our area are using? There are many substances that fall into those categories of opioids.
Well, I think, we probably look at, I think when the issue first started to hit, there was a lot of focus and concern regarding the misuse of prescription pain medication. And as things started to, discussions came out, reactions were done within the medical community, there was the access to prescription pain medications lessened. And then with that, then came the economic guns and butter component of supply and demand with heroin. So heroin ended up becoming a real primary substance and source to address the addiction needs. And then we've also had additional medications come to light the last few years in relationship to fentanyl and carfentanil, which are even more potent and dangerous narcotics than what we've had.
Gary, an opioid withdrawal unit will soon be opening here in Duluth.
Right.
Tell us about that.
So one of the problems right now has been if someone presents looking for help for an addiction, it's sometimes a week to a month before they can access that help. So the primary goal of opening the opioid withdrawal unit is it'll be done under our detox license, which doesn't require the same hurdles to be overcome to access treatment. So people can access it essentially 24 hours a day. So when the time is right, they're ready for some help, the unit will be available to help them manage that withdrawal, stabilize the patient, do the assessment, figure out the funding, and move them directly into treatment. So it'll reduce the barrier to entry for access to treatment.
So they can do it on their own. They can apply for help. They don't have to go through the court system.
That's right. I mean, most of the referrals we expect will come from hospitals, doctors, social services, but we're working with law enforcement too, and law enforcement in our community wants to be a partner here so that when they have people that come to them for help rather than take the criminal justice approach, that they would be able to access some help on behalf of this individual. So it's really a full-scale community collaborative effort.
Laura, how will the UMD College of Pharmacy be using the money that it's receiving through this grant?
We have a number of goals. We'll be working with local coalitions throughout the area, Ely, Hibbing, Virginia, Cotton Tower, all of those areas. So we're going to be building up those coalitions, also working with pharmacists and prescribers in the area to provide education and training on naloxone and getting folks referred to treatment. We're also working with drug court families and with institutions of higher education.
Laura, how big a problem are unused prescription drugs in the home?
It is a very big problem, and it causes a lot of folks concern too as they learn more about how the medications they have in their own medicine cabinets could be contributing to the problem. And so that's a part of our education too. We'll be providing those resources on how to properly dispose of those medications.
Now, Laura mentioned naloxone.
Right.
Is that the medication that you'll be working with in the medication treatment that you're going to be doing in addition, or no?
No, naloxone is sometimes known as Narcan, is an overdose reversal drug. So the primary medication for treatment is methadone or Suboxone, or buprenorphine is the technical name for it. And these are drugs that stabilize the brain, normalize the brain to allow people to start putting their lives back together, and then ultimately, if they can withdraw from those medications under supervision. So we're moving people from unregulated, unsupervised, illicit drug use to prescribed, regulated, supervised medication within a treatment setting.
Is it often that someone who's addicted to opioids can actually fully break that cycle of addiction?
Oh yeah, I mean it certainly is something that people can do with the right kind of support. But like with any other addiction, I mean alcohol and other drugs are no different. It's a long-term. It tends to be a chronic kind of problem that needs long-term support and effort on the part of the individual and their family and the communities.
Greg, I hear the term prevention programming. What is that?
Prevention programming is basically trying to set resources and elements in place to assist and support individuals, families, and communities from actually entering into the addiction cycle. Public education is so very important. we want to try to address issues as early as junior high, maybe elementary, high school. The longer you're able to delay the period or the age of first use, the greater opportunity we have to succeed, in maintaining individuals to be free of addiction tendencies throughout their life.
It sounds like young children in this day and age know that
Yes.
drug addiction does exist.
Yes, unfortunately, within our department, we end up doing chemical use assessments from time to time with adolescents, and back up until a few years ago, when things were mentioned like, do you use needles or narcotics? It was this big, oh no, I'd never do that. And now we end up doing assessments for individuals as young as 13, 14 years old that have actually been injecting medications, including heroin.
Yeah.
Well, that's all the time we have, but congratulations on receiving the grant, and good luck as you work to put it to good use and help solve this problem in our area. Appreciate you coming in.
Thank you for being here.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, let's dig into our news file archive for a look at what was making news 25 years ago this week.
When they finally reached the shore, the adventurers all wore a look of accomplishment and fatigue. These 16 athletes have spent the past 5 weeks in their kayaks. And while they did not travel the entire distance around the lake that way, the trip was still demanding because of the countless stops the team made to educate people about the importance of preserving this great lake.
I don't even want to say that we've done that. I think that spirit and that desire to preserve these lakes has existed on the shorelines of both of these lakes for quite some time. But what I think we've done is we've created a catalyst to actually make it happen.
For the Russians in the group, even more demands were made on their time and energy.
After that, we go to host family and spoke all night, because everybody would like to know what's happening in Russia now, how is our opinion about United States, about Canada, but we have very nice time.
Lake Superior and Lake Baikal together make up more than 30% of the world's fresh water. And organizers say on this, the 20th anniversary of the Clean Water Act, there couldn't be a more appropriate time or a greater need. But for now, this group is content to mix the waters of the two lakes and drink a toast to the future of the world's water. Lisa Blagan, KDLH News.
Well, another major hurricane is about to make landfall in the United States. While there is still a long road to recovery in Texas, an even larger storm is heading toward South Florida. Hurricane Irma has devastated islands in the Caribbean, and now Floridians are bracing for its blast. Here in our region, volunteers are mobilizing to help the stricken areas, and so joining us tonight is Dan Williams, Executive Director of the Red Cross of Northern Minnesota, and Tony Guerra is the Disaster Program Organizer for the local Red Cross. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here tonight. I'm wondering, this is really a nationwide effort, isn't it, to get volunteers, not just something here in the Northland, but the Northland is bending over backwards. We are responding.
Yeah, no, so I mean, in any disaster, we want to take volunteers from as close as possible, right? So when, if there's a small disaster in Houston, Houston Red Cross volunteers will be able to step up and resolve it. So what the Red Cross does is try bringing in the resources that are necessary as inexpensively as possible, right? And not making unnecessary travel for our volunteers. But you're right, our volunteers have really stepped up really all across Minnesota and Wisconsin, but in our case, really here in the Northland.
Mm-hmm. Tony, you're the Disaster Program Organizer. When a disaster hits, what happens? What comes into play as these volunteers are contacted and start mobilizing locally?
Actually, the volunteers are watching it from, even before it was started. They were getting ready. These folks we have, these volunteers know what's going on, and they were making plans even before we start calling them, asking if they're available. We got some old hands at this. I mean, I've got a few of them still from Katrina that still volunteer for us, but they were ready a few weeks ago when talk of Harvey came, And right now what we're doing is pulling our volunteers, saying who's available to go down to Irma in Florida. We've got a few staging. North Carolina, they're going to be going to the Virgin Islands there as soon as they can get a plane in, but they're coming out, our volunteers, and getting trained up, getting ready to go.
Dan, what's the best way residents from this area can help?
Well, I mean, one way is to become a volunteer, right? So when we have people deploy to a disaster across the country, there's still stuff that happens here. There's still home fires that happen. There's still our work with veterans. So we're always looking for volunteers. And at some point, you know, maybe the opportunity to deploy to a national disaster, but also to donate financially. So, you know, the way that we have the resources to get our volunteers down to where they need to feed folks, to provide shelter, is because we have financial resources. And the Northland has really stepped up. You know, we've had, you know, a lot of local donations over these 11 days since Harvey hit, and so that's really the best way. And you go to redcross.org to donate to the Red Cross, or you can text Harvey to 90999 to donate $10 too.
What kind of training do the volunteers have to go through before they're deployed to a national disaster like we're seeing down in Texas and potentially in Florida?
We train them in functions. For instance, the mass care function is the sheltering and feeding of those evacuated. Logistics, when Red Cross comes on scene, it's a big movement. We rent warehouses, so we need logistical people, warehouse people. Hey, we've got to have folks getting our computers going. We have computer experts down there. Then we have our professional staff, behavioral health, the nursing staff, who also, you know, besides taking care of the clients, they're helping the volunteers. Our volunteers are giving people, if we don't pull the reins on them, they'll 12, 13, 14 hours, they'll work to their job. They come back tired, but they come back fulfilled with an experience that they can use here locally, in which we have in our few incidents that we had up here.
Dan, with two serious back-to-back disasters hitting the southern United States, if something should happen up here in the Northland where we need help, is the Red Cross still, even with all the help giving down there, still capable of assisting here?
Yeah, I mean, you look at even where we are right now, we've got maybe 10 to 15% of our volunteers will deploy. And so we know we have volunteers here that just aren't in a position to leave for 2 weeks, right? So they have a job that they can't leave for, or they've got family issues. So, you know, we're really confident of our ability to respond to local disasters here as well. But again, all hands are on deck, and so we're definitely in the mode of looking for new volunteers as well.
And how long do people deploy when they're sent somewhere? What kind of a time commitment are you asking people
We
to
ask
put
for
up?
a minimum of 2 weeks. 2 weeks, they get down there, and sometimes they're asked, hey, would you like to stay another week? And they do, but 2 weeks is minimum. That's about enough work and stress most of our folks can take.
Will you be moving people from the Texas area to Florida, or how does that happen when you've got these two disasters kind of taking place simultaneously?
Yes, we're already looking at, you know, Harvey, about 2 weeks into Harvey, the response to Harvey. A lot of those folks are asking to be transferred to the Florida area right now. We like them ideally to come home for a while, take a break, then head back down there. But there are those asking to go. Our vehicles that are down in Texas right now, they're starting to move towards the Florida area, staging in North Carolina and Georgia.
Somebody asked me, so I'll ask the two of you, are school supplies needed down there?
Well, I'll respond to that. I mean, one of the challenges that every disaster faces is you get a lot of unneeded donated stuff, so used clothing and that sort of thing. Donation programs are fantastic if places have a home for it. And so if organizations that are doing drives for things and this and that have a place that they're going to be going, you've already got a place that you identify what the needs are and how they're going to be distributed, it's fantastic. Unsolicited stuff can sometimes really be a big burden in a disaster.
Okay.
So safest sometimes to just donate money and have those who are running the aid figure out where it's needed most?
And if you're considering donating stuff to a place, you know, ask them, do you have a place that this is set to go?
Okay, with that we have to leave it. Thank you. You're busy people. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much for being here. This week we continue our profiles of local veterans who served in combat operations in Vietnam. Tonight we feature a UWS graduate who flew 72 combat missions over Vietnam in B-52 bombers. It's the latest in our special series, Voices of Vietnam.
Of course, in the mid-60s, late 60s, the draft was an issue, and a college deferment was actually very attractive at that time. And I always wanted to go to college. And the University of Wisconsin-Superior offered Air Force ROTC. So I signed up and I did 4 years of Air Force ROTC here at the University of Wisconsin-Superior. I went into pilot training, spent a year down in Enid, Oklahoma, in pilot training. I was assigned to a B-52 unit up in northern Maine, the 69th Bomb Squadron, and got checked out as a B-52 co-pilot, flying up there, training missions and different types of missions. June of '72, there was a large operation, it was named Bullet Shot, and literally hundreds of B-52s were sent over to support the operations in Vietnam. I was flying a G model B-52, and we went to Guam to fly missions from Guam over Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia over several years. I made 3 different trips over there as a TDY operation and flew 72 combat missions. I did 2 tours in Andersen Air Force Base, Guam, and 1 in Utapao, Thailand. The missions were easily 10 hours, non-stop, takeoff from Guam, fly to Vietnam. We would fly in cells, the 3 airplanes together, and it was a 24-hour operation. Our crew was a 6-man crew, and so we had a navigator and a radar navigator. And they were in charge of the weapons. I was a co-pilot, but then I upgraded to aircraft commander. In my last tour over there, I was an aircraft commander as a first lieutenant. The most common target explanation was suspected truck parks. And basically what you were doing, you were bombing into jungle. We never really bombed a facility or a road or a river or a bridge. It was mostly into jungle. The longest mission was 16 and a half hours from Guam, and that was unrefueled. As a pilot, co-pilot, you were really quite busy for that entire length of the mission. And the B-52 is an amazing piece of equipment with redundancies and 8 engines. So you could always lose 1 or 2 or even 3 engines, and it became an emergency procedure, but it was not that dramatic. We had one incident where a tire blew out and we had to fly the mission with the wheels down, and of course that creates a lot more drag, and then we diverted after the bomb run into Utapao, Thailand, and we landed in Thailand on just several of the wheels that we had. Not all of them were down because of the problem. And as we landed, we blew out the rest of the tires as the airplane came to a rather abrupt stop on the runway. You never knew what was going to happen. I was in for about 5 years, and the war ended. And if you recall, during the Jimmy Carter presidential administration, the huge cutbacks to the military. A lot of pilots were being taken from the cockpit into jobs that were not non-flying jobs. And I made a decision at that time that it was probably a time for me to go do something else. And you'll never guess where I ended up. I ended up at the Duluth International Airport. And so I had a job at the base over here in Duluth for a couple of years, beginning in 1976. And so it was almost like coming back home.
Coming up this Sunday, September 10th, viewers are invited to a special preview of the Ken Burns documentary, The Vietnam War. The screening begins at 4 p.m. in the Great Hall of the Depot in Duluth, with coffee and conversation following at 5 p.m.
It's time now for a look at the business headlines from Business North. Jim Kelly of HK Hospitality Management says the company hopes to pen a deal that could bring millions of dollars to the region, along with a world-class resort and conference center in Cable, Wisconsin. The Florida-based company is discussing the possible purchase and could sign an agreement for Telemark Lodge this fall. The group is willing to invest $47 million to purchase and rebuild the lodge. Once complete, it would be a 250-room resort with a 20,000 square foot conference center.
The U.S. Water subsidiary of Duluth-based Elite has acquired Tonka Water, a supplier of water treatment systems. Founded in 1956, the Minnetonka firm has a national footprint and serves more than 4,800 industrial customers. When Elite purchased U.S. Water in 2015, the corporation said it would make further acquisitions to grow the new division. Well, today the subsidiary operates in 49 states and Canada, employing about 450 people. U.S. Water provides integrated water systems for commercial and industrial customers by combining chemicals, equipment, engineering, and service.
The newly updated Canyon 9 golf course at Superior National in Lutsen opened for play on Thursday. It was the last phase of a $4.5 million improvement plan to enhance the 27-hole course. Superior National opened in 1992 and is owned by the Cook County Grand Marais Economic Development Association. Canyon 9 is the second golf course redevelopment project at Lutsen, following a facelift of the River 9 course in 2016. A grand opening at the recreational complex is scheduled for next spring. For more on these and other stories, visit businessnorth.com.
Call now if you have a comment. Dial 218-788-2849 to leave a message. You can also send an email to Almanac North at WDSE.org and visit the WDSE website for the latest program information, schedules on our 4 digital channels, and the latest news and events here at the station. And Julie, next week, a big week for us. Coming up, the start of season 26 for Almanac North.
Wow, the years are starting to fly by. It feels like we just celebrated season 25 starting.
We did, a year ago.
Moments ago.
For Julie and the crew at WDSE, I'm Dennis Anderson. Have a great weekend. Good night, everybody, and be kind.